"What you saw in the chamber tonight," I said slowly, "was that her?" Sebastian shook his head. "I do not know what it was. It had her face, her form, but there was nothing of her behind it, nothing of the woman I loved. The eyes, they were," he could not finish the sentence. "Dead," I said. "They were dead." He flinched as if I had struck him. "Yes. Whatever I reached, whatever I pulled through the bridge, it was not Arabella. It was something else, something that wore her face but held only hunger where her heart should have been, something that should not exist." We sat in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling softly, the great house settling around us with creaks and groans. Finally, I reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold, and they trembled in my grip, but he did not pull away. "You cannot bring her back," I said gently. "Whatever lives beyond the veil, Sebastian, it is not meant to be called back. That thing in the chamber, it was not Arabella. It was something else, something that used her memory as a mask. The woman you loved is gone, truly gone, and no amount of etheric energy can change that. I know." His voice cracked. "I think I have always known. But the guilt, Evangeline, the guilt is a living thing inside me, a monster that will not let me rest. I killed her. My arrogance, my pride, my refusal to accept the limits of what is possible. How can I live with that? How can I go on knowing what I did?" I thought of my mother, coughing her life away in that small room above the shop. I thought of all the times I had wished I could save her, could turn back time, and give her the years that poverty and illness had stolen. I thought of the desperate yearning to undo what cannot be undone, the terrible bargains we make with ourselves when we love someone and cannot bear to let them go. I understood him. Perhaps better than anyone else in the world could understand him. And that understanding was its own kind of love. "You go on because you must," I said, "because the dead cannot live again, but we who remain can still choose what to do with our days. You can choose to honor her memory, Sebastian, not by destroying yourself in a futile attempt to resurrect her, but by living well, by doing good, by allowing yourself to feel something other than grief." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in his eyes. The walls he had built so carefully over 4 years of mourning and guilt and obsession were crumbling, and behind them was a man who was lost and lonely and desperately tired of carrying his burden alone. "How can you say that?" he asked. "After what I did to you. After I used you, lied to you, nearly killed you. You should hate me. You should despise me." "Because I understand," I said simply. "Because I have spent my whole life being used by people who did not see me. You at least had the decency to choose me for my strength rather than my weakness. And because," I hesitated, the next words catching in my throat, "because I believe you are a better man than you know. A man who made terrible mistakes, yes. A man who let his grief drive him to cruelty. But also a man who loved deeply and lost greatly, and has been trying, in his own broken way, to make things right." Something broke in him then. He fell forward, his head coming to rest on my shoulder, and I felt his whole body shaking with sobs. I held him, this strange, cold, brilliant man who had wagered on my unworthiness and found something he did not expect. I held him and stroked his dark hair and whispered words of comfort that I was not certain either of us believed. But I wanted to believe them. And perhaps, I thought, that was a start. The weeks that followed were unlike anything I had experienced since arriving at Ashworth Manor. Sebastian dismantled the apparatus in the basement, piece by piece, working alongside a team of engineers he hired specifically for the task. The strange humming ceased, the lights no longer flashed in the night, and gradually the oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the house began to lift. It was not an easy process. There were nights when I heard him pacing in his rooms, nights when I knew the guilt and grief were too much to bear alone. Sometimes he came to my sitting room and sat by the fire, not speaking, just needing another presence to remind him that he was still alive. Sometimes I read to him from the novels I had discovered in the library, stories of adventure and romance and human folly that seemed to bring him a small measure of peace. Sometimes we simply sat in silence, two broken people learning to heal in each other's company. He was a different man without his obsession consuming him. Still quiet, still prone to brooding silences, but there was a lightness about him that I had not seen before. He joined me for meals and actually ate, engaging in conversation that ranged from politics to literature to the proper technique for pruning roses. He accompanied me on walks through the winter garden, pointing out the places where flowers would bloom in spring, describing colors and scents with a passion that surprised me. He laughed, occasionally, a rusty sound that seemed to surprise him more than anyone, and each time I heard it, something warm bloomed in my chest, and he looked at me. He looked at me in ways that made my pulse quicken and my cheeks flush, in ways that had nothing to do with experiments or ether or life force. "Your lessons are progressing well," he said one afternoon as we sat in the library, a fire crackling in the grate and a chessboard between us. He had been teaching me to play, and I had discovered that I liked the strategy of it, the way each piece had its role, and yet the game was always changing. "The Winterbourne Ball is in 2 months. The tutors say you are ready." I considered the board, seeing a pattern he had missed. I captured his knight with my bishop, opening a line to his king. "Am I still a wager to you?" Sebastian was silent for a moment. Then he reached across the board and took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "You were never a wager," he said quietly. "Not truly. I told myself you were, because it was easier than admitting the truth." "Which is?" "Which is that I saw you in that shop, and I felt, for the first time since Arabella died, that I might be able to feel something again." His gray eyes met mine, and in their depths I saw something that looked very much like hope. I did not understand it then. I told myself I chose you for your vitality, your strength, the scientific properties that made you useful to my work. But I think I chose you because you looked at me as if you were not afraid, as if you saw something beneath the coldness, beneath the reputation, beneath the monster society believed me to be. Something that was worth seeing. My heart was beating so loudly, I was certain he could hear it. "I am still not afraid," I whispered. He leaned across the chessboard and kissed me. It was not the passionate embrace of a romance novel. It was soft and tentative, almost questioning, as if he were not quite certain how to do this anymore, as if the muscles required for tenderness had atrophied from disuse. But it stirred something in me that I had long thought dead, a warmth that spread from my lips to my chest to every corner of my being. When we parted, his forehead rested against mine, and I could feel his breath, shallow and rapid. "I do not deserve you," he said. "That is for me to decide." He laughed, a sound I had never heard from him before, rusty with disuse but genuine. I suppose it is. We did not solve everything that day, or in the days that followed. There were still nightmares, still moments when I saw shadows cross his face and knew he was thinking of Arabella. There were still times when I felt the phantom pull of the apparatus, an echo of the draining sensation that reminded me how close I had come to being consumed. But we were learning, both of us, to navigate the space between us, to trust. My mother came to live at the manor after she recovered enough to travel. Sebastian had arranged for the finest doctors, the best medicines, and though she would never be fully well again, she was comfortable and cared for in ways I could never have provided on my own. She had a suite of rooms in the sunny south wing, with a balcony overlooking the garden, and a maid whose only duty was to attend to her needs. She liked Sebastian, I discovered with some surprise. The first time he came to visit her, I had expected her to be cold and suspicious, to see through his aristocratic facade to the cold man beneath. But she had always been a better judge of character than I was. She saw past his reserve to the awkward kindness beneath, and she told me one evening, as we sat together in her sunny room overlooking the garden, that she thought I had chosen well. I did not choose, I reminded her. He chose me. She smiled, a knowing expression that mothers seem to acquire along with their gray hairs. Did he? Or did you simply make yourself available to be chosen? She reached out and patted my hand, her skin papery but warm. You have always been stronger than you knew, Evangeline. You just needed someone to see it. I thought about that for a long time afterward. The Winterbourne ball arrived on a night of frost and stars. I had spent hours preparing, my hair arranged in elaborate curls by a lady's maid who had been hired specifically for the occasion. My gown, a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that I had designed myself and had made by the finest dressmaker in London. Sebastian had offered to have it made without my input, but I had refused. If I was going to win this wager, if I was going to stand before all of society as his wife and claim my place among them, I wanted to do it wearing something that was truly mine. The gown was cut to flatter my figure rather than hide it. The bodice fitted and the skirt flowing in a way that suggested elegance rather than apology. The blue was the exact shade of the flecks in Sebastian's gray eyes, and the neckline was lower than anything I had ever worn, revealing the curves of my shoulders and the swell of my bosom. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I did not see the fat seamstress from Whitechapel. I saw a woman who had survived impossible odds, who had faced down monsters both human and otherwise, who had earned her place in the world through strength and wit and stubborn refusal to give up. I saw a baroness. "You are beautiful," Sebastian said when I descended the stairs to meet him in the entrance hall. He was dressed in black, as always, but there was a warmth in his eyes that transformed his severe face into something almost tender. "I am suitable," I corrected him, but I was smiling. He took my hand and pressed a kiss to my gloved fingers. "You are extraordinary, and you are going to make every lord who bet against me choke on his champagne." The Winterbourne estate was a blaze of light and music when we arrived, carriages queuing along the drive for nearly a mile, ladies in gowns of every color ascending the steps on the arms of gentlemen in impeccable evening dress. The house itself was enormous, even larger than Ashworth Manor, with columns and terraces and windows that glowed golden in the winter darkness. I felt a flutter of nerves as we joined the procession, but Sebastian's hand was steady on my arm, and I reminded myself that I had survived far worse than a ballroom full of aristocrats. The reactions were varied, as we had expected. Some faces registered shock at the sight of me. The fat seamstress from Whitechapel transformed into a baroness in blue silk. I saw their eyes travel over my figure, cataloging my curves, waiting for me to prove that I did not belong. Others showed skepticism, watching me with narrowed eyes, waiting for me to make a mistake that would reveal my humble origins. A few, a precious few, showed something like admiration. Lady Ashworth, a woman in diamonds and emerald, approached us, her gaze assessing. I recognized her from the society pages, the Countess of Hartfield, one of the most powerful hostesses in London. "I have heard much about you." I curtsied, deep and graceful, exactly as my tutors had taught me. My posture was perfect, my movements smooth, my expression serene. "I hope some of it was favorable, my lady." The Countess's lips twitched. "They said you were common as dirt and twice as dull. Clearly they were misinformed." She swept away before I could respond, and Sebastian leaned close to my ear. "That was a compliment," he murmured. "Lady Hartfield does not waste her time on people she finds uninteresting." The evening passed in a whirl of dances and introductions, of careful conversations and strategic silences. I deployed everything my tutors had taught me, the perfect curtsy, the modulated voice, the serene smile that revealed nothing. I danced with earls and viscounts and lords whose names I would never remember, and I held my own in discussions of politics and literature and the latest scandals. When someone mentioned the rumor that I had been a seamstress before my marriage, I smiled and said, "Yes, I was. I am quite proud of my skill with a needle. Do you have a talent you are proud of? The questioner, a mean-spirited young woman whose name I had already forgotten, sputtered and retreated, and I felt a small surge of triumph. I watched Sebastian across the room as he spoke with the men who had bet against him, saw the moment they realized they had lost. Their faces went through stages of disbelief, then reluctant acceptance, then something that might have been respect. The Aether Baron had done the impossible. He had taken a nobody, a nothing, a woman who should have been invisible, and made her someone. But as I accepted congratulations and fielded curious questions about my sudden rise to prominence, I realized that I did not care about the wager. I had never cared about the wager. What I cared about was the man across the room, the man who caught my eye over the heads of the assembled guests and smiled, a real smile that reached his gray eyes and transformed them into something beautiful. I made my way through the crowd toward him, and he met me halfway, taking my hand and drawing me onto the dance floor as the orchestra struck up a waltz. "We have won," he said as we began to move, his arm secure around my waist. "Have we?" "The wager, the bet. You have conquered society, Lady Ashworth. No one can deny that you belong here now." I looked up at him, at the face that had seemed so cold when I first saw it, and now seemed merely guarded, protecting something precious beneath. "I do not want to belong here," I said. "I want to belong with you." His step faltered just for a moment. "Evangeline." "I am not Arabella," I continued, pressing forward before I could lose my courage. "I cannot replace her, and I would not want to. What you had with her was real and beautiful, and her death was a tragedy that nothing can undo. But I am here, Sebastian. I am alive, and I am yours, if you want me. Not because of a wager, not because of ether or experiments or any scientific principle, simply because I choose to be." He stopped dancing. Around us, other couples continued to waltz. A swirl of color and movement, but we stood still in the center of it all, his hands on my waist, his eyes locked on mine. "I want you," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I have wanted you since that day in the garden, since you told me that my coldness was simply part of who I am, since you held me while I wept and did not judge me for my weakness. I have been afraid to admit it, afraid that wanting you would be a betrayal of what I felt for her. But you are right. You are alive. And I think," he drew a breath, "I think I am ready to be alive again too." When he kissed me this time, there was nothing tentative about it. It was a declaration, a promise, a claiming that I returned with equal fervor. Around us, I heard gasps and whispers, the scandalized flutter of fans and the low hum of gossip beginning to spread. The Aether Baron, kissing his unsuitable wife in the middle of the winter-born ball. It would be in every society paper by morning. I did not care. We left the ball early, claiming a sudden indisposition, and rode home through the cold night in a carriage that felt suddenly too small for the enormity of what had passed between us. Sebastian held my hand the entire way, his thumb tracing patterns on my palm, and when we reached the manor, he did not go to his wing, and I did not go to mine. That night, in the great bed with its blue velvet hangings, I learned that Sebastian's coldness was indeed merely a mask, and beneath it burned a passion that matched my own. He touched me as if I were precious, as if every curve and hollow of my body were something to be worshipped rather than hidden. He traced the fullness of my hips with reverent hands, pressed kisses to the softness of my belly, murmured words of adoration against my skin. And when I touched him in return, I felt the walls he had built finally crumble completely, leaving only a man who was broken and scarred and beautiful in his imperfection. Afterward, as we lay tangled together in the firelight, he told me about Arabella. Not the tragedy of her death, but the joy of her life, the way she had laughed at his serious nature, the terrible jokes she had told that he pretended not to find funny, the passion she had brought to everything she did. He spoke of her without flinching, and I listened without jealousy, because I understood that loving someone who was gone did not diminish the capacity to love someone who was present. "She would have liked you," he said, pressing a kiss to my hair. "She had no patience for pretension, and you have none either. She would have seen straight through you, just as she saw straight through me." I smiled against his chest. I think I would have liked her too. We fell asleep as the fire burned low, and for the first time since I had come to Ashworth Manor, I felt truly at home. The months that followed were not without difficulty. Sebastian's grief did not disappear overnight, and neither did my insecurities about my place in his world. There were arguments, misunderstandings, moments when the chasm between who we had been and who we were becoming seemed impossible to bridge. He retreated into silence sometimes, haunted by memories I could not share, and I struggled with the constant awareness that I was being watched and judged by a society that had never wanted me. But we faced it together, with honesty and patience and a stubborn refusal to give up on each other. I converted the basement laboratory into a proper library, filling the shelves with books on botany and natural philosophy, subjects that interested me far more than ether and resurrection. Sebastian took up painting, a hobby he had abandoned after Arabella's death, and filled the manor with canvases that gradually shifted from somber grays to vibrant colors. We hosted dinners for the neighbors, attended parties where I held my own among countesses and duchesses, and quietly funded a clinic in Whitechapel where seamstresses and their mothers could receive proper medical care. We never spoke publicly of the apparatus or the experiments or the terrible thing I had seen in the basement that night. Those memories remained between us, a secret that bound us together, even as it reminded us of how far we had come. Sometimes, late at night, Sebastian would take my hand and press a kiss to my palm, a silent acknowledgement of what I had given him. Not my life force, but something more valuable still, a second chance. My mother lived for another 3 years, long enough to see her first grandchild, a girl we named Rose after the flowers in the garden where Sebastian had first kissed me. She died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by the family she had never dared to hope for, and though I grieved her loss, I was grateful for the time we had been given. The wager that had brought Sebastian and me together became a story we told at dinner parties, embellished with each retelling until it barely resembled the truth. The lords who had bet against him had long since paid their debts and moved on to new scandals, and the tale of the Aether Baron and his unsuitable wife became a kind of legend, a story of transformation and unexpected love that young women whispered to each other when they dreamed of their own fairy tale endings. They did not know the whole truth, of course. They did not know about the apparatus and the ghost and the terrible night when I had nearly died. They did not know about the servants who had been drained and sent away, about the years of guilt and obsession that had driven Sebastian to the edge of madness. They saw only the ending, the Baron and his Baroness dancing at balls, walking arm in arm through the gardens of their estate, presiding over a household that ran with smooth efficiency. But perhaps that was enough. Perhaps the whole truth was not necessary so long as the ending was happy. We had 2 more children after Rose, twin boys who had their father's gray eyes and their mother's stubborn nature. They filled the manor with noise and chaos, with laughter and tears, and the endless small crises of childhood. Sebastian proved to be a devoted father, far more patient than I would have expected from the cold man who had walked into my shop all those years ago. He told them stories at bedtime, taught them to ride horses and play chess, held them when they cried, and celebrated their triumphs with unfeigned joy. Watching him with our children, I sometimes thought of Arabella, of the future they might have had together if not for that terrible night in the laboratory. I felt no jealousy, only a strange kind of gratitude. Her death had been a tragedy, but it had also been, in some inexplicable way, the beginning of my life. I tried not to think about what that said about the universe, about fate and chance, and the mysterious forces that shaped our lives. I had seen too much to believe in a simple, benevolent providence. But I also could not believe that our meeting had been mere coincidence, that Sebastian had walked into my shop at the exact moment when I was desperate enough to accept his impossible offer. Perhaps there was something between fate and chance, something that guided us toward the people we were meant to find. Or perhaps I simply wanted to believe that, because the alternative was too random, too meaningless, too frightening to contemplate. There is a portrait of us now, hanging in the gallery alongside the long-dead Ashworths and the golden-haired Arabella who still smiled from her canvas. Sebastian commissioned it for our 10th anniversary, insisting that we pose together with our children in the garden where we had shared our first kiss. The artist captured something true in that painting. The way we look at each other, the ease of our posture, the quiet joy that has become the foundation of our life together. I am not beautiful in the portrait, not in the way that Arabella was beautiful. My face is round rather than delicate, my figure generous rather than slim, my hands showing the faint calluses that I have never quite lost despite years of being a lady. But I am alive, and I am loved, and in the end, that is more than I ever dared to hope for. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and Sebastian sleeps beside me, I think about the girl I was before I became Lady Ashworth. I think about the cramped room above the seamstress shop, the ache of hunger that was my constant companion, the endless parade of women who looked through me as if I were furniture. I think about the bet that was never really a bet, the laboratory that was never really about ether, the marriage that was never really about transformation. And I realize that the greatest surprise of all is not what Sebastian discovered about me, not my vitality or my strength or my ability to survive things that should have destroyed me. It is what I discovered about myself. I am not unsuitable. I am not a wager to be won or lost. I am Evangeline Ashworth, Baroness of the Manor, wife and mother and survivor. I am the woman who walked into hell and walked out again, who faced a ghost and refused to let it consume her, who loved a broken man and helped him find his way back to the living. I am at last exactly who I was always meant to be. And that, perhaps, is the only resurrection that ever truly mattered. The end. There are moments that divide a life into before and after, and mine came on a cold November morning when I woke with no memory of who I was. And as I would soon discover, the world I had lost was searching for me just as desperately as I was searching for myself. The first thing I remember is cold. Not the cold of winter or the chill of rain, but something deeper, something that had settled into my bones as though it belonged there. I lay on a stone slab, a sheet pulled over my face, and the silence around me was so complete that I thought perhaps I had not woken at all. Perhaps this was death, I thought. Perhaps this was what waited on the other side of the veil, a room of shadows and the distant drip of water, and nothing else for all eternity. But then I heard footsteps. They were quick, purposeful, the click of heels against flagstone. A door opened somewhere beyond my sight, and a voice, high and startled, cried out in alarm. I tried to speak, to move, to signal that I was not what they thought I was, but my body refused to obey. I lay there, helpless, as the sheet was pulled from my face and a lantern was thrust toward me, its light burning my eyes. A woman screamed, a man cursed, and then there was chaos, a flurry of voices and hands and the scrape of furniture being pushed aside. I was lifted, examined, poked and prodded like a specimen in a laboratory. Someone pressed fingers to my throat and declared, with a voice that trembled, that I had a pulse. Someone else crossed themselves and whispered a prayer, and all the while I lay there, unable to speak, unable to explain, unable to do anything but stare at the ceiling and wonder how I had come to be in this place. It was a mortuary. I learned that later, when the shock had faded and the doctors had arrived. They called it a miracle, though their eyes said something different. They called me fortunate, blessed, a wonder of modern medicine. But I saw the way they looked at me when they thought I was not watching. I saw the fear, the suspicion, the whispered conversations that stopped the moment I entered a room. I had died. That much was certain. The records showed it clearly. A death certificate signed by a physician whose name I did not recognize, dated 3 days before my awakening. The cause of death was listed as a fall, an accident, a tragedy that had befallen a young woman of no particular importance. There was no family listed, no next of kin, no one to claim my body or mourn my passing. I was, in the eyes of the law and the church and the society that had discarded me, no one at all. And yet I was alive. The doctors could not explain it. They ran their tests and consulted their books and argued among themselves in voices that grew louder with each passing day, but in the end, they had no answers. I was a mystery, an impossibility, a thing that should not exist. And so, when the hospital could no longer justify keeping me, when the bills mounted and the whispers grew too loud to ignore, they did what any respectable institution would do. They released me into the streets with nothing but the clothes on my back and a warning to never speak of what had happened. I remember standing on the steps of that hospital, watching the carriages roll past and the people hurry by, and feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. I had no money, no home, no memory of who I had been before the darkness took me. I had only fragments, pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. A name that felt familiar on my tongue, but carried no weight. A face in my mind, handsome and cold, that I could not place. And a sense, deep and unshakable, that I had lost something precious, something that I would never get back. The streets of London are not kind to the forgotten. I learned that quickly in those first terrible days when hunger gnawed at my stomach and the cold crept into my bones. I tried to find work. I went to the factories and the shops and the houses that lined the better streets, hoping that someone would take pity on me, that someone would see past my ragged clothes and hollow eyes and give me a chance. But the doors remained closed, the faces remained hard. And the whispers followed me wherever I went, a chorus of judgment and contempt that drowned out everything else. She is the one, they said, the one who came back, the one who cheated death. They did not say it with admiration. They did not say it with wonder. They said it with fear, with disgust, with a venom that cut deeper than any blade. I was a curiosity at first, a story to be shared over tea and crumpets, a scandal to be discussed in drawing rooms and parlors. But curiosity soon turned to suspicion, and suspicion to hatred. I was unnatural. I was wrong. I was a creature that should have stayed in the grave, and my presence among the living was an affront to God and nature alike. The first time someone confronted me, I did not understand what was happening. I was walking down a narrow lane near Whitechapel, my head bowed against the rain, when a voice called out behind me. I stumbled, turned, and found myself facing a group of women whose faces were twisted with suspicion. One of them stepped forward, a tall woman with graying hair and a cross clutched in her fist. "Leave this place," she hissed. "We do not want your kind here." I tried to explain. I tried to tell them that I was just a woman, just a person, just someone who was lost and alone and frightened. But my words were drowned out by their shouts, and I had no choice but to run. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, until I collapsed in a doorway and wept until I had no tears left to shed. That was the night I learned what I had become. Not a miracle, not a wonder, but a mystery in the eyes of the world. I found shelter that night in an abandoned workhouse, its walls crumbling and its windows broken, but it offered protection from the rain that had begun to fall. I huddled in a corner, my arms wrapped around my knees, and listened to the thunder rolling across the sky. The lightning illuminated the room in brief, blinding flashes, revealing the desolation around me. Broken furniture, shattered glass. The remnants of lives that had been discarded, just as I had been discarded. But something inside me refused to surrender. Some spark of defiance, some ember of determination that would not be extinguished. I did not know where it came from, this stubborn refusal to yield. Perhaps it was a remnant of the woman I had been before, the woman whose memories still eluded me. Perhaps it was something new, something born from my strange awakening. Whatever it was, it kept me going. In the morning, I rose and began again. The weeks that followed blur together in my memory, a haze of hunger and cold and despair. I slept in doorways and under bridges, in the abandoned corners of cemeteries where even the dead seemed to pity me. I begged for scraps and stole what I could, my dignity eroding with each passing day until I barely recognized the woman I had become. The fine clothes I had been wearing when I woke, the silk dress and leather boots that had once marked me as a lady, were traded for bread and shelter until I was left with nothing but rags. And still, the cruelty continued. The society women were the worst. They would see me on the street, huddled in a doorway, or searching through rubbish for food, and their lips would curl with disgust. Some of them crossed to the other side of the road, holding handkerchiefs to their noses as though my very presence might contaminate them. Others were bolder, calling out insults and taunts that their servants echoed with cruel laughter. One woman, a plump matron in a burgundy gown, once ordered her footman to chase me away from a park bench where I had stopped to rest. He did so roughly, pushing me away while she watched from her carriage with a smile on her painted lips. "You are nothing," she called out as they drove away. "Less than nothing, and you always will be." Another time, I was caught stealing bread from a vendor's cart. The man seized me by the arm and called for the constables, shouting for all to hear that I was a thief and a vagrant. A crowd gathered, their faces cold with judgment, and I was taken to the station where I spent a night in a cold cell before being released with a warning. I did not understand their coldness. I had done nothing to them, nothing but exist. But perhaps that was enough. Perhaps my very existence was an affront to everything they believed, a challenge to the natural order that they could not accept. I was a reminder that life held mysteries they could not explain, and that unsettled them. But even in the depths of my despair, there were moments of clarity, moments when the fragments of my past would surface, unbidden and unexplained, and I would catch glimpses of a life I could not remember. A grand house with marble floors and crystal chandeliers, a library filled with books and the smell of leather and tobacco, a music room where sunlight streamed through tall windows and a piano sat waiting to be played, and faces, so many faces, all of them male, all of them looking at me with an affection that made my heart ache. I did not know who they were. I did not know why they haunted me. But I knew, with a certainty that defied explanation, that they were important, that they held the key to the mystery of who I had been and why I had died, and how I had come to be reborn in a world that despised me. The name came to me in a dream. I was standing in a garden, the air heavy with the scent of roses, and a man was speaking to me in a voice I could not quite hear. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through me. He reached out to touch my face, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a warmth that was equal parts love and longing and grief. "Eliza," he said. "Remember who you are, Eliza. Remember us." I woke with the name on my lips and tears streaming down my face. Eliza. It felt right, like a key sliding into a lock, like a door opening onto a room I had forgotten existed. I whispered it to myself over and over, until it became a talisman, a reminder that I was more than the creature the world had made me. I was Eliza, and I would find the truth, no matter what it cost me. It was on a night in early November when the fog lay thick upon the city and the gaslight struggled to pierce the gloom, that I first saw him. I had taken shelter in the doorway of an abandoned shop, my body curled against the cold, when the sound of footsteps made me look up. A man was walking toward me, his coat collar turned up against the damp, his face hidden in shadow. I tensed, ready to flee, but something in his gait made me pause. He moved with purpose but not aggression, with intent but not menace. He stopped a few feet away and looked down at me, and I saw his face for the first time. He was young, perhaps 30, with sharp features and eyes that were a peculiar shade of gray, like smoke or storm clouds. His hair was dark and unkempt, falling across his forehead in a way that suggested he cared little for fashion. His clothes, though well made, were worn and faded, as though he had seen better days. "You are the one," he said. "The one they found in the mortuary." I said nothing. Experience had taught me that silence was safer than speech, that any word I uttered would be twisted and used against me. But the man did not seem to expect a response. He simply stood there, studying me with those strange gray eyes, as though I were a puzzle he was trying to solve. "They call you a witch," he continued, "a demon, a creature returned from the dead." He paused, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "But I do not believe in witches or demons. I believe in science. And you, my dear, are a scientific impossibility." I found my voice then, hoarse and cracked from disuse. "And what does that make you? A scientist come to study me? To cut me open and see what makes me tick?" He laughed, a sound that was surprisingly warm. "Hardly. I am many things, but a vivisectionist is not among them." He reached into his coat and withdrew something small and rectangular. A calling card, I realized, as he held it out to me. "My name is Sebastian Vane. Lord Sebastian Vane, if we are being formal, though I care little for titles. And I have a proposition for you, Miss Whoever you are." I took the card, my fingers trembling. The paper was thick and expensive, the name embossed in elegant script, Lord Sebastian Vane. The name meant nothing to me, but the address listed beneath it was in a respectable part of the city, far from the squalor of Whitechapel. "Why?" I asked. "Why would a lord concern himself with a creature like me?" "Because I know what it is to be cast out," he said quietly. "To be judged and condemned for things beyond your control. And because I believe there is more to your story than the gossips know." He glanced around at the fog-shrouded street, at the shadows that seemed to press in from all sides. "Come to my house tomorrow. We will talk, and perhaps together we can find the answers you seek." He turned and walked away without waiting for a response, his footsteps fading into the mist until I was alone once more. I looked down at the card in my hand, at the name that promised nothing and everything, and I felt something stir in my chest. Not hope exactly. I had learned better than to hope, but something, a spark perhaps, a flicker of light in the endless darkness. I spent a sleepless night turning his words over in my mind. A lord who did not believe in witches or demons. A man who called me a scientific impossibility rather than a monster. It was such a small thing, such a subtle distinction, and yet it felt revolutionary. For the first time since I had woken in that mortuary, someone had looked at me and seen not a creature to be feared, but a mystery to be understood. When morning came, I made my decision. I had nothing to lose and everything to gain. The worst that could happen was that Lord Sebastian Vane would prove to be like all the others, another person who would use me and discard me when I was no longer useful. And if that happened, I would survive. I had survived worse. I went to him the next day. The house was not what I expected. I had imagined a grand mansion, the sort of place where lords and ladies held balls and entertained the cream of society. But the building before me was modest by aristocratic standards, a narrow townhouse with peeling paint and windows that needed washing. The garden was overgrown, the iron gate rusted, and the brass knocker on the door was tarnished with age. I hesitated on the steps, suddenly aware of how I must look. I had done my best to clean myself, scrubbing my face in a public fountain and combing my fingers through my tangled hair, but I was still dressed in rags, still hollow-eyed and half-starved. What business did a creature like me have in a place like this? But before I could turn away, the door opened. A woman stood in the doorway, elderly and sharp-eyed, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked me up and down, her expression unreadable, and then stepped aside. "He is expecting you," she said. "Follow me." The interior of the house was as unexpected as its exterior. Instead of the lavish furnishings I might have imagined, the rooms were cluttered with books and papers, with strange instruments and glass containers filled with liquids of every color. The walls were lined with diagrams and charts, with drawings of machines and anatomical sketches that made my stomach turn. It was less a home than a laboratory, I realized. A place of science and experimentation, far removed from the drawing rooms of polite society. The woman led me to a room at the back of the house, a study filled with even more books and papers than the others. Lord Sebastian Vane sat at a desk by the window, his gray eyes fixed on a contraption of gears and wires that he was adjusting with delicate precision. He looked up as I entered, and a smile crossed his face. "You came," he said. "I was not certain you would." "I had nowhere else to go," I admitted. He nodded, as though this was the answer he had expected. "Please sit. Mrs. Blackwood, some tea for our guest." The elderly woman, Mrs. Blackwood, gave a curt nod and disappeared. I settled into a chair across from the desk, feeling painfully out of place amid the scientific chaos. Lord Sebastian set aside his contraption and leaned back, studying me with the same intensity he had shown the night before. "Eliza," I said, before he could speak. "That is my name. Eliza. I do not know the rest, but I know that much." "Eliza," he repeated. "It suits you." He paused, and something flickered in his gray eyes. "Do you know why you came back, Eliza? Do you know what brought you out of the darkness?" I shook my head. The doctors said it was a miracle, a quirk of fate. "But I do not believe in miracles, my lord, and I do not believe in fate. Neither do I." He rose from his chair and moved to a shelf lined with glass jars, each containing something that I could not quite identify. "I believe in cause and effect, in action and consequence, in the laws of nature that govern everything, even the things we do not understand." He selected a jar and held it up to the light, revealing a pale substance that floated in clear liquid. "This is ether, or rather, a distillation of it." "Do you know what ether is, Eliza?" I shook my head again. "It is the space between things," he explained, "the invisible force that connects all matter, all energy, all life. It cannot be seen or touched or measured by ordinary means, but it is there, all around us, all the time. And there are those who have learned to harness it, to use it for purposes that most would consider impossible." A chill ran down my spine. "Are you saying that someone used this ether to bring me back?" "I am saying that it is possible." He set the jar back on the shelf and turned to face me. "There is a family in London, Eliza, a powerful family, one that has mastered the science of ether in ways that no one else has achieved. They call themselves the Ashfords, and they are known in certain circles as the Ether Barons. The name hit me like a physical blow. Ashford. I knew that name. I had heard it before, whispered in the fragments of memory that haunted my dreams. Ashford. The grand house with the marble floors, the library filled with books, the faces of men who looked at me with love. "I see that the name is familiar," Lord Sebastian said quietly. He moved closer, his gray eyes searching my face. "What do you remember, Eliza? What do you know about the Ashfords?" I shook my head, trying to sort through the chaos of my thoughts. "Nothing. Everything. I do not know. I have dreams, flashes of memory, but they do not make sense. There is a house, and there are men, 6 men, and they look at me as though I matter, as though I belong. 6 men," he repeated. 6 brothers, to be precise, the Ashford brothers, the most brilliant and dangerous scientists in all of England. He paused, and something in his expression shifted. And if my suspicions are correct, Eliza, you are not just connected to them. You are one of them. You are an Ashford. The words hung in the air between us, impossibly heavy. I wanted to laugh, to dismiss them as the ravings of a madman. But something deep inside me, something that had been sleeping since I woke in that cold, dark room, stirred to life. I thought of the dreams, the fragments, the faces of the men who looked at me with love. I thought of the name that had come to me unbidden, the name that felt like a key to a door I had forgotten existed. Eliza Ashford. Could it be true? Mrs. Blackwood returned with the tea, and the conversation paused as she set out cups and saucers with practiced efficiency. I wrapped my hands around the warm porcelain, grateful for something to hold on to, something solid and real in a world that had become increasingly unreal. Lord Sebastian waited until the housekeeper had left before continuing. I have been studying the Ashfords for years, he said. Their work, their inventions, their experiments with ether. I believe that they have created something extraordinary, a machine capable of reversing death itself. And I believe that machine was used on you. Why? I asked. Why would they use it on me? That is what we must discover. He leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. I do not know how you died, Eliza, or why you were left in that mortuary to be forgotten. But I intend to find out. And I suspect that the answers lie with the Ashfords themselves. I stared at him, this strange man with his cluttered laboratory and his impossible theories. He was offering me something I had thought lost forever. A purpose, a path, a chance to reclaim the life that had been stolen from me. Why do you care? I asked. What is the Ashford family to you? His expression darkened, and for a moment I saw something raw and painful in his eyes. They are everything, he said quietly. And they are nothing. Once I was one of them. An apprentice, a colleague, a friend. I was going to marry their sister. He paused, and his voice dropped to a whisper. But that was before the scandal, before they destroyed my reputation and cast me out, before they accused me of causing a tragedy and left me to rot. A tragedy? He nodded. A fellow scientist, a man named Dr. Malcolm Pierce. He was brilliant, perhaps the most brilliant mind of our generation. He was working on a project with the Ashfords, something that pushed the boundaries of what we thought was possible. And then one night, there was an accident in his laboratory. He did not survive. And they blamed you? Lord Sebastian's jaw tightened. I was the last person seen with him. I had argued with him earlier that day about the direction of his research. I thought he was going too far, crossing lines that should not be crossed. When the accident happened, it was easy to assume that I had been involved somehow. But you did not do it. No. He looked at me, and I saw the weight of years of pain in his eyes. I did not do it, but I could not prove my innocence, and the Ashfords made no effort to help me. They allowed the rumors to spread, allowed my name to be dragged through the mud, and then they cut all ties with me. I was expelled from the scientific community, stripped of my titles, left with nothing but this house and my research. Why would they do that? I asked. If you were innocent, why would they not defend you? Because they were protecting something. His voice dropped to a whisper. Something more important than my reputation, something they could not allow the world to know. He paused, and his gray eyes met mine. I have spent years trying to discover what that something is, and now, for the first time, I have a chance. You are that chance, Eliza. You are the key to everything. I understood then what he was offering me. It was not charity. It was not kindness. It was an alliance forged in the fires of shared suffering and common purpose. He needed me as much as I needed him, perhaps more. What would I have to do? I asked. Help me find the truth, he said, about the Ashfords, about your death, about the machine that brought you back. He reached out and took my hand. his touch surprisingly gentle. Together, we can expose them. We can clear my name and reclaim your past. We can bring justice to those who have wronged us both. I looked down at his hand on mine, at the warmth of his skin against my cold fingers. It had been so long since anyone had touched me with kindness, so long since anyone had looked at me with anything other than fear or disgust. This man, this disgraced lord with his gray eyes and his broken dreams, was offering me something I had forgotten existed. Hope. "I will help you," I said. "I will do whatever it takes." And so began our partnership, though I did not yet know what it would cost us, what it would reveal, what it would become. The days that followed were a revelation. Lord Sebastian, I learned, was a man of many talents. He was an inventor, a scientist, a philosopher, and, when the occasion demanded, a skilled investigator. His laboratory was filled with devices of his own creation, machines that hummed and clicked and glowed with a light that seemed almost alive. He explained each one to me with a patience that surprised me, breaking down complex theories into terms I could understand, treating me as an equal rather than an ignorant woman to be patronized. I spent hours in his laboratory, watching him work, asking questions, learning the language of ether science. He showed me how the invisible force could be channeled through certain metals, how it could be stored in specially designed containers, how it could be released in controlled bursts that produced effects that seemed almost magical. I saw him heal a dying plant with a touch of ether-infused water. I saw him illuminate a room without candles or gas. I saw him communicate with a device in another room, sending signals through the air with no visible connection. "It is not magic," he insisted, though I could see the wonder in his own eyes. "It is science. It follows rules, even if we do not yet understand all of them. The Ashfords have spent generations mapping those rules, and whatever they have discovered, whatever they are hiding, it is something extraordinary. I, in turn, shared what little I knew, the fragments of memory that surfaced in my dreams, the faces of the 6 men who might be my brothers, the grand house that appeared again and again, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Lord Sebastian listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions, piecing together the puzzle of my past with the same precision he applied to his experiments. "You speak of a music room," he said one afternoon as we sat together in his study. "A piano, you say, and sunlight through tall windows." I nodded. It is one of the clearest memories. I can almost feel the keys beneath my fingers, hear the notes echoing off the walls. "The Ashford estate has a music room," he said slowly. "I remember it well. It was where their sister used to play." He paused, and his expression grew distant. "She was a gifted pianist. Everyone said so." Their sister. My heart clenched at the words. "Do you think that is who I am? Their sister?" "I think it is possible." He met my eyes, and I saw something there that I could not quite name. More than possible, perhaps. The more I learn, the more I believe it. "You are Eliza Ashford, the youngest of the family, the only daughter, the one who disappeared 3 years ago and was never seen again. Disappeared. There was a scandal," he explained, "a broken engagement, a flight from society. The official story was that she had gone abroad for her health, but there were rumors. Some said she had been sent away in disgrace. Others said she had died." He shook his head, but no one knew the truth. The Ashfords made certain of that. He rose from his chair and moved to the window, staring out at the gray London sky. "I was there," he continued, his voice distant, "in those final days before she vanished. I was a guest at the Ashford estate, collaborating with the brothers on a project that was supposed to change everything. I saw her, the sister. She was beautiful, vibrant, full of life. But there was a sadness in her eyes, a weight on her shoulders that I could not understand." "What happened to her?" I asked. "I do not know." He turned to face me, One day she was there, and the next she was gone. The Ashfords said she had left for the continent, for her health. But I saw their faces when they spoke of her. I saw the grief they tried to hide, and I knew they were lying. I tried to process this new information, to fit it into the fragments of memory that already crowded my mind. A broken engagement, a scandal, a flight from society. It felt right somehow. It felt like the missing piece of a puzzle I had been trying to solve for weeks. "But if I am Eliza Ashford," I said slowly, "then why was I found dead in a mortuary in Whitechapel? Why was I alone and forgotten? Why did my brothers not come for me?" Lord Sebastian's expression darkened. "That," he said, "is what we must discover." Our investigation took us deep into the shadows of London, into the forgotten corners of the city where secrets were bought and sold like commodities. Lord Sebastian had contacts everywhere, informants who owed him favors, men and women who moved through the underworld with an ease that spoke of long practice. He introduced me to pickpockets and thieves, to forgers and smugglers, to a network of outcasts who survived by knowing things that others did not. There was Martha, a former lady's maid who had been dismissed without references for refusing the advances of her employer's son. She now ran a boarding house near the docks, and she knew the gossip of every household in London. There was Finn, a young man with quick fingers and quicker wits, who could slip into any building and out again without being noticed. There was Dr. Harwood, a disgraced physician who had lost his license for performing surgeries that the medical establishment deemed too radical, but who still practiced in secret for those who had nowhere else to turn. Each of them had a story, a reason for existing on the margins of society, and each of them looked at me with something other than fear or disgust. They looked at me with recognition, with understanding, with a kinship that came from knowing what it was to be cast out. "You are one of us now," Martha told me one evening as we sat together in her cramped parlor. "The world has thrown you away, but you are still here, still fighting. That is what matters." I learned quickly. I had to. The streets were dangerous, especially for a woman alone, and I could not rely on Lord Sebastian to protect me at every turn. He taught me to defend myself, to move unseen through crowds, to read the signs that separated friend from foe. He taught me the art of observation, the skill of noticing details that others overlooked. And slowly, gradually, I began to see the world as he saw it, not as a place of chaos and cruelty, but as a puzzle to be solved, a mystery to be unraveled. And as the weeks passed, something else began to grow between us, something I had not expected and did not know how to name. It started with small things, a lingering glance across the dinner table, a touch that lasted a moment too long, the way his voice softened when he spoke my name, as though it were a word he treasured. I noticed how he always made certain I was comfortable before we began our work, how he insisted I eat properly, even when the investigation consumed all our attention, how he checked on me during the night if he heard me cry out in my sleep. And I noticed other things too, the way his gray eyes seemed to lighten when he smiled, the rare and precious times when the weight of his burdens lifted, the grace of his hands as they moved over his instruments, the fingers long and deft, the nails trimmed short for practical work, the sound of his laughter, which emerged so infrequently but filled the room when it did, warm and genuine and utterly infectious. I found myself thinking about him at odd moments. While practicing the walk of a lady, I would imagine his arm linked through mine. While learning to dance, I would picture his hand at my waist, his eyes looking into mine. While lying awake in the darkness, I would wonder what it would feel like to be held by him, to be safe in his embrace, to be loved. I told myself it meant nothing, that I was reading too much into simple courtesy, but the warmth that spread through my chest when he looked at me, the flutter in my stomach when our hands brushed against each other, these were not the reactions of a grateful protégé. They were the reactions of a woman who was falling in love. I tried to fight it. I reminded myself of the circumstances that had brought us together, of the alliance we had forged and the purpose we shared. I reminded myself that I was a woman without a past, without a name, without a place in the world he inhabited. I reminded myself that he had loved before, that he had been engaged to another woman, that his heart might still belong to her. But love, I discovered, does not listen to reason. It grows in the cracks between logic and sense, taking root in the most unexpected places. And when Lord Sebastian looked at me with those gray eyes, when he spoke my name in that soft, reverent voice, I knew that I was lost. It was on a night in late December, as snow fell softly over the city and the fire crackled in the hearth, that we finally spoke the words we had been avoiding. We were sitting together in his study, poring over documents that his contacts had obtained, papers that mentioned the Ashfords by name, papers that hinted at experiments more radical than anything the world had seen. I was tired, my eyes aching from the dim light, and I had not realized how close I was sitting to him until I turned my head and found his face mere inches from mine. He looked at me, and I saw something in his expression that made my breath catch in my throat. Not curiosity or calculation, but something deeper. Something that mirrored what I felt in my own heart. "Eliza," he said, and his voice was barely more than a whisper. I could not speak. I could not move. I could only sit there, frozen, as he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my face. His touch was gentle, almost reverent, and I felt tears prick at my eyes. "I should not feel this way," he said. "It is wrong. It is dangerous. You are a woman under my protection, and I am a man with nothing to offer you. No title that matters, no fortune to speak of, no future that does not involve shadows and secrets. I do not care about titles," I whispered. "I do not care about fortunes, but you should." He withdrew his hand, and I saw the pain in his eyes. "You deserve better than a disgraced inventor who lives on the fringes of society. You deserve a man who can give you everything you have lost. A home, a family, a place in the world." I reached out and took his hand, pressing it to my cheek. "You gave me something more valuable than any of those things," I said. "You gave me hope. You believed in me when no one else would. You treated me as a person when the world saw me as a monster." I paused, searching for the right words. "I do not know who I was before I died, Sebastian. I do not know what I have lost or what I might reclaim. But I know what I feel now. And I feel that I would rather face the shadows with you than live in the light without you." He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the conflict in his eyes. The war between duty and desire, between reason and passion. And then, slowly, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to mine. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and tender, as though he feared I might break. But there was fire beneath the gentleness, a heat that warmed me from the inside out. I kissed him back, pouring into the embrace all the fear and longing and love that had been building inside me for weeks. And when we finally drew apart, breathless and trembling, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. "We do not know what the future holds," he said quietly. "We do not know what we will find when we uncover the truth about the Ashfords. It may be dangerous. It may cost us everything. Then we face it together," I said. "Whatever comes, we face it together." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his sharp features into something almost beautiful. Together, he agreed, always together. And so we continued our investigation, bound now by something more than shared purpose. The trail led us through the darkest corners of London, through secrets that grew more disturbing with each revelation. We learned of experiments that defied the laws of nature, of machines that could harness the power of ether to do things that should have been impossible. We learned of deaths and disappearances, of scientists who had gotten too close to the truth and paid the ultimate price. And at the center of it all, like a spider at the heart of a vast and intricate web, were the Ashfords. The Ashford brothers were legends in the scientific community, though few outside the inner circles knew the true extent of their work. There were 6 of them, each a master of a different aspect of ether science. The eldest, Lord Edmund Ashford, was a physicist who had developed theories that revolutionized the field. The second, Lord Arthur, was an engineer whose machines were rumored to be decades ahead of their time. The third, Lord Frederick, was a chemist who had discovered new elements that others could not even detect. The fourth, Lord George, was a biologist who had mapped the very essence of life itself. The fifth, Lord Henry, was a physician whose surgeries were considered miracles. And the sixth, Lord William, was a philosopher who had written treatises on the nature of consciousness and the soul. Together, they had built an empire of knowledge and power, hidden behind the respectable facade of the Ashford estate. And together, it seemed, they had done something that crossed all the lines of morality and ethics. They had conquered death. The proof came in the form of a letter, smuggled out of the Ashford estate by a servant who had grown disillusioned with his masters. It was addressed to Lord Edmund, written in a hand that trembled with age, and it spoke of something called the Lazarus machine, a device capable of capturing the essence of a person at the moment of death and restoring it to the body before the connection was lost. A machine that had been used successfully only once, on a subject who had been dead for less than an hour. The letter described the process in detail that made me tremble. The subject must be placed within a chamber of ether-conductive metal within minutes of the event. The machine then creates a resonance field that preserves the connection between body and soul, preventing the final separation. Then, through a process the letter called regenerative infusion, the body is repaired and the soul is anchored once more. But there was a warning, too. The process was dangerous, the letter cautioned. There was no way to predict whether the subject would return whole, or whether pieces of their memory, their personality, their very self would be lost in the transition. The first and only test had been. The letter trailed off here, the handwriting becoming shaky and uncertain. The first test had not been entirely successful. The subject's name was not mentioned, but I knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that it was me. Lord Sebastian read the letter 3 times, his face growing paler with each pass. "This is it," he said finally. "This is the proof we have been looking for. The Ashfords built a machine to reverse death, and they used it on you." "But why?" I demanded. "If I am their sister, why would they bring me back and then abandon me? Why would they leave me to die in a mortuary in Whitechapel?" He shook his head. "I do not know, but I intend to find out." Our next step was clear. We had to confront the Ashfords themselves. We had to enter the lion's den and demand the truth, no matter what the cost. The preparations took weeks. Lord Sebastian called in every favor he was owed, assembled every piece of evidence we had gathered, and constructed a case so airtight that even the most powerful family in London could not dismiss it. He reached out to allies in the scientific community, men who had long suspected the Ashfords but lacked the proof to challenge them. And he trained me, relentlessly, in the art of navigating the treacherous waters of high society. "You must be perfect," he told me. "You must be beyond reproach. The Ashfords will try to discredit you, to dismiss you as a madwoman or a fraud. You cannot give them any ammunition." I learned quickly. I learned to walk with the grace of a lady, to speak with the polish of an aristocrat, to hold myself with a dignity that belied my ragged past. Mrs. Blackwood, whose loyalty to Lord Sebastian ran deeper than I had realized, became my tutor in the finer points of etiquette. She taught me which fork to use at dinner, how to address a duchess, the proper way to enter and exit a room. She corrected my posture, refined my diction, and transformed me from a street urchin into something that could pass for a lady. But it was not merely about appearances. Lord Sebastian also prepared me for the intellectual battle that awaited. He taught me everything he knew about ether science, about the Ashford family history, about the society that would judge me the moment I walked through the door. He quizzed me on names and faces, on scandals and alliances, on the complex web of relationships that bound the upper class together. And in the quiet moments between lessons, when the fire burned low and the night pressed close, we talked. We talked about everything and nothing, about the past and the future, about hopes and fears and dreams. I learned that he had wanted to be a poet when he was young, before science captured his imagination. I learned that he still wrote verses sometimes, though he never showed them to anyone. I learned that he missed his mother, who had died when he was a boy, and that he had never forgiven his father for remarrying so quickly. I shared my own fragments of memory, the pieces of my past that emerged like flotsam from a shipwreck, the garden full of roses, the piano that seemed to call to me, the faces of men who might be my brothers. With each revelation, I felt more real, more solid, more like a person who had existed before the mortuary and would continue to exist after. And slowly, gradually, I felt the pieces of my old self falling back into place. There were moments, brief and fleeting, when the memories returned with startling clarity. I would be practicing a curtsy, and suddenly I would remember my mother teaching me the same movement, her gentle hands guiding my shoulders. I would be learning the steps of a waltz, and suddenly I would be back in a grand ballroom, spinning in the arms of a man whose face I could not quite see. The memories were painful, a reminder of everything I had lost, but they were also proof that I was who Lord Sebastian believed me to be. I was Eliza Ashford, and I was going home. The night of the confrontation arrived in the depths of January, when the snow lay thick upon the ground and the air was so cold it seemed to burn. Lord Sebastian and I rode through the streets in a hired carriage, our breath fogging in the frigid air, and I clutched his hand like a lifeline. "You are ready," he said quietly. "You have done everything right. There is nothing to fear." "I am not afraid," I replied. But I was lying, and we both knew it. The Ashford estate rose before us like a mountain, its Gothic spires reaching toward the sky, its windows blazing with light. I recognized it instantly, though I had never seen it from this angle. This was the house of my dreams, the place where I had grown up, the home I had forgotten. I did not expect the wave of emotion that crashed over me as we approached the gates. It was not fear or anger, but something deeper, something that felt like grief. I had loved this place once. I had been happy here. And then something had happened, something terrible, and it had all been taken away. The butler who answered the door recognized me immediately. I saw it in his eyes, the widening of his pupils, the sharp intake of breath. But he said nothing, only ushered us inside and led us to a grand drawing room where a fire blazed in the hearth. "Wait here," he instructed. "I will inform the masters of your arrival." We waited in silence, the tension building with each passing moment. I studied the room around me, the portraits on the walls, the books on the shelves, the familiar objects that tugged at my memory. I knew this place. I had lived here. And yet it felt like a stranger's home, a place I had visited in a dream. The door opened, and they entered. 6 men, tall and distinguished, each bearing a resemblance that left no doubt they were brothers. They ranged in age from perhaps 40 to 60, their hair varying shades of gray and black, their eyes the same deep blue that I saw when I looked in the mirror. They moved with a synchronized grace that spoke of long familiarity, spreading out across the room like generals surveying a battlefield. The eldest, Lord Edmund, stepped forward. His face was hard, his eyes cold, but I saw something flicker behind the mask, something that might have been recognition or fear. "Lord Sebastian," he said, his voice like ice. "I had not expected to see you here again, not after the scandal." Lord Sebastian inclined his head. "Lord Edmund, it has been too long." The second brother, Lord Arthur, fixed his gaze on me. "And who is this you have brought with you?" "A lady of the streets, by the look of her." He smiled, a thin, cruel expression. Is this the evidence you promised? A madwoman dressed up as a debutante? Lord Sebastian's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. This is Eliza Ashford, your sister, the woman you brought back from the dead and then abandoned to the mercy of the streets. The silence that followed was absolute. I saw the brothers exchange glances, saw the masks slip for just a moment, revealing the shock and fear beneath. And then Lord Edmund laughed, a sound that was utterly devoid of humor. "Our sister is dead," he said. "She died 3 years ago, in a tragic accident. We mourned her, we buried her, and we have never forgotten her." I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest. "Then explain this," I said, and I held out my hand to show them the scar on my palm. A crescent-shaped mark, white against my skin. I do not remember how I got this scar, but I know it has always been there. I know it is part of who I am. The brothers froze. I saw Lord Henry, the physician, lean forward, his eyes fixed on the scar, and I saw Lord Edmund's composure finally crack. "That is not possible," he whispered. "The machine failed. The readings indicated complete failure. We were certain." He trailed off, and I saw the truth in his eyes. They had tried to bring me back. They had used their Lazarus machine to restore me from the brink of death. But something had gone wrong, and they had thought they had failed. "I remember the moment," Lord George said, his voice thick with emotion. "We placed you in the chamber. We activated the machine. The ether flowed, and for a moment we thought. But then the readings flatlined. The connection was lost. We thought we had destroyed you completely." "We could not bear to look," Lord Henry added. "We could not bear to see what we had done. So we sent the servants to dispose of, to take care of." He broke off, unable to finish. They had left me for dead, their own sister. They had abandoned me to the mortuary and returned to their lives, convinced that their experiment had been a failure. The grief was genuine. I could see it in their faces, in the tears that streamed down Lord William's cheeks, in the way Lord Frederick's hands trembled as he gripped the back of a chair. They had not abandoned me out of cruelty. They had abandoned me out of cowardice, out of an inability to face the consequences of their own ambition. It did not make it right, but it made it understandable. "I did not die," I said, and my voice was steady despite the emotion that burned inside me. "I woke up alone and afraid, in a room full of shadows. I was thrown into the streets with nothing. I went hungry and was shunned and called a stranger. All because you could not be bothered to check whether your machine had actually worked." Lord Frederick, the chemist, stepped forward. His face was pale, his hands trembling. "We did not know," he said. "We were told you had been properly disposed of. The mortuary was supposed to handle everything. We never imagined that I might still be alive." I laughed, and the sound was bitter. "Of course not. Why would you imagine such a thing? I was merely an experiment to you, a test subject for your precious machine. You did not care whether I lived or died, only whether your science had succeeded. That is not true." The voice came from the youngest brother, Lord William, who had remained silent until now. He stepped forward, his blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "We loved you, Eliza. We have always loved you. What happened to you? It was not supposed to be like this." "Then what was it supposed to be like?" I demanded. Tell me everything. Tell me why I died, and why you tried to bring me back, and why you left me to rot in the streets of Whitechapel." The brothers looked at each other, and I saw the weight of years of secrets pressing down upon them. And then Lord Edmund spoke, his voice heavy with regret. "Sit down," he said. "It is a long story, and you deserve to hear all of it." What followed was the most painful hour of my life. I learned the truth about my death, the truth about the Lazarus machine, and the truth about the family I had forgotten. I had been engaged once, to a man named Lord Reginald Blackwell, a wealthy aristocrat with a reputation for cruelty, hidden behind a veneer of charm. The engagement had been arranged by our father, a man whose love for his children was exceeded only by his love for social advancement. Lord Reginald was titled wealthy and connected to some of the most powerful families in England. It was, by all accounts, a perfect match. But I had seen through the veneer. Lord Frederick was the first to speak of it. "You knew," he said quietly. "You knew what he was, even when the rest of us were blind. You saw the cruelty in him, the darkness that he hid so well." The memories came flooding back as he spoke. I remembered Lord Reginald's smile, the way it never quite reached his eyes. I remembered his hands, elegant and manicured, and the bruises they had left on the servants who displeased him. I remembered his voice, soft and cultured in public, but cold as ice when we were alone. "You begged us to call off the engagement," Lord Arthur said. "You came to each of us in turn, pleading for our help." But father would not listen. He was too enamored with the prospect of a title, too convinced that Lord Reginald would make you happy. I had not wanted the marriage, but our father had insisted, believing that the alliance would bring respectability to the Ashford name. I had protested, but my words had fallen on deaf ears. The wedding was planned, the invitation sent, and I was expected to comply. But I had refused. On the night before the wedding, I had fled the Ashford estate, determined to escape the fate that awaited me. I had run through the dark streets, my heart pounding, my lungs burning, until I had reached the edge of a bridge overlooking the Thames. There, Lord Reginald had found me. What happened next was unclear, even in my brother's account. They knew only that I had gone over the edge of the bridge, whether by accident or by violence, and that my body had been recovered from the river the following morning. They knew that Lord Reginald had claimed innocence, had sworn that I had jumped of my own accord, and that the authorities had believed him. They knew that the scandal had been hushed up, the death ruled an accident, and the wedding quietly cancelled. And they knew that they had been consumed by guilt, by rage, by a desperate need to undo what could not be undone. The Lazarus machine had been their answer, a device they had been developing for years, designed to reverse the process of death itself. They had never intended to test it so soon, had never imagined using it on someone they loved. But grief had driven them to desperation, and they had brought my body to their laboratory, still cold from the river, and they had tried to bring me back. "It should not have worked," Lord Edmund explained, his voice hollow. "The readings indicated failure. The machine showed no signs of success. We thought we had lost you forever." "But you did not check," Lord Sebastian said quietly. "You did not verify. You simply assumed the worst and moved on." "We were afraid," Lord George admitted. "Afraid of what we might find. Afraid of what it would mean if we had brought you back wrong, if you had returned as something less than yourself." He looked at me with eyes that were filled with sorrow. "We made a terrible mistake, Eliza. We abandoned you when you needed us most, and we can never make that right." I sat in silence, processing everything I had heard. The betrayal, the abandonment, the casual cruelty of men who claimed to love me but had left me to suffer alone. I wanted to hate them. I wanted to rage and scream and make them pay for what they had done. But when I looked at their faces, when I saw the genuine anguish in their eyes, I found that I could not. They were my brothers, my family, the only family I had. And despite everything, despite the pain and the anger, I loved them still. "What happened to Lord Reginald?" I asked finally. "What happened to the man who harmed me?" Lord Edmund's expression hardened. "He escaped justice," he said. "The authorities believed his story. We had no proof, no evidence, nothing that could bring him to account." He looked at me, and I saw something fierce in his eyes. "But that was before you came back, before you proved that our science was not a failure after all." He leaned forward. "We can bring him to justice now, Eliza. With your testimony, with our technology, we can prove what he did to you. We can make him face the consequences." I felt the anger stir inside me, hot and fierce. "Yes," I said, "yes, We will make him pay. But first, Lord Sebastian interjected, there is the matter of clearing my name. You accused me of causing the tragedy, Lord Edmund. You destroyed my reputation and cast me out. If we are to be allies in this, I require an acknowledgement of my innocence. The brothers exchanged glances, and I saw the shame in their expressions. Lord Edmund nodded slowly. You were never to blame, he admitted. The accident. It was simply that. An accident. A terrible accident. We blamed you because it was easier than accepting the truth. He extended his hand. I apologize, Lord Sebastian. Sincerely and completely. I will do everything in my power to restore your reputation. Lord Sebastian hesitated, and I saw the old wounds warring with the new alliances in his eyes. Finally, he took Lord Edmund's hand. Then we are agreed, he said. We work together, for justice, for truth, for Eliza. And so it was settled. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The Ashford brothers, once my enemies, became my allies. They opened their home to me, restored my place in the family, and threw the full weight of their resources behind the effort to bring Lord Reginald to justice. I was dressed in gowns of silk and velvet, attended by servants who treated me with a deference I had almost forgotten. I was introduced to society not as a monster or a madwoman, but as Lady Eliza Ashford, returned from a long illness abroad, ready to reclaim her place among the elite. The reunion with my brothers was not without its difficulties. There was too much pain between us, too many years of separation and misunderstanding for the wounds to heal overnight. Lord Edmund, in particular, struggled with the weight of his guilt. He had been the eldest, the one responsible for the family in our father's absence. He had been the one who had approved the engagement to Lord Reginald, who had ignored my pleas for help, who had believed the convenient lie over the uncomfortable truth. I cannot forgive myself, he told me one evening, as we sat together in the library where I had once spent so many happy hours. I failed you, Eliza. I was supposed to protect you, and instead I delivered you into the hands of a monster. I took his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against mine. You made a mistake, I said quietly, but you did not push me off that bridge. You did not leave me to die in the river. Lord Reginald did that, and it is Lord Reginald who will pay for it. The whispers began almost immediately. People remembered the scandal, the broken engagement, the mysterious disappearance. They speculated and gossiped, as they always did, but the Ashford name carried weight, and few dared to challenge it openly. The women who had once shunned me in the streets now curtsied when I passed. The matron in the burgundy gown, the one who had ordered her footman to push me away, turned white as a ghost when she saw me at a society ball. I smiled at her, a knowing smile, and watched her flee the room in embarrassment. The memories of my time on the streets were still fresh, still painful. I remembered every insult, every slight, every moment of coldness that had been shown to me. I remembered the faces of those who had turned away, the names of those who had called me stranger, the voices of those who had wished me gone. And I remembered the promise I had made to myself in the darkest hours of those endless nights. If I survived, if I somehow found my way back to the light, I would not forget. I would not forgive. I would make them understand what it felt like to be powerless, to be despised, to be treated as less than human. But as the days passed and my strength returned, I found that the desire for vengeance was fading. The people who had hurt me were not evil, not really. They were afraid. They were ignorant. They were products of a society that valued appearance over substance, that judged worth by the clothes one wore rather than the content of one's character. I did not excuse them, but I began to understand them, and understanding brought something that felt almost like peace. There was one person, however, who deserved no understanding. One person whose cruelty had been calculated, deliberate, and unforgivable. Lord Reginald Blackwell had not hurt me out of fear or ignorance. He had hurt me because he wanted to, because he enjoyed it, because he believed that his wealth and title gave him the right to destroy anyone who stood in his way. He would not escape justice. But justice was not only about revenge, it was about truth. And the truth, as we discovered, was more complicated than anyone had imagined. Lord Reginald Blackwell, it turned out, was not simply someone who had wronged me. He was the head of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of society. He had used his wealth and influence to silence witnesses, to destroy evidence, to protect himself from any consequence. The investigation uncovered troubling patterns that went beyond my own case. There had been other women, we discovered, other victims who had crossed Lord Reginald's path and suffered greatly. A serving girl who had left his estate under mysterious circumstances. A young widow who had rejected his advances and then disappeared entirely, her fate unknown. A governess who had been dismissed after threatening to expose his mistreatment of the children in her care. Each case had been covered up, explained away, forgotten. Lord Reginald's wealth and influence had protected him from consequence, time and time again. He was untouchable, or so he believed. He walked through society with a smile on his face and secrets in his heart, secure in the knowledge that no one would ever hold him accountable. He had harmed others before, and he would do so again unless someone stopped him. We gathered our evidence carefully, piece by piece, building a case that would be impossible to dismiss. Lord Sebastian's contacts provided testimony from servants and associates, people who had seen the truth but had been too afraid to speak. The Ashford brothers used their scientific expertise to analyze physical evidence, proving beyond doubt that my death had been no accident. Lord Arthur designed a device that could detect traces of ether residue, proving that my body had been subjected to the Lazarus machine. Lord Frederick analyzed samples that showed Lord Reginald had been present at the scene of my death, his distinctive cologne leaving traces that even the river could not wash away. And I, using the skills Lord Sebastian had taught me, infiltrated Lord Reginald's inner circle. I became someone new, a mysterious widow from the north, come to London to seek her fortune. I changed my hair, altered my voice, adopted a persona that was nothing like the woman Lord Reginald had once known. And I watched him. I listened. I gathered every scrap of information that might help bring him down. It was dangerous work. Lord Reginald was a powerful man with powerful allies, and more than once we found ourselves in precarious situations. There was a night when suspicious figures were seen watching Lord Sebastian's house, forcing us to relocate our work to a safer location. There was a day when Lord Reginald himself confronted me at a garden party, his eyes narrowing with suspicion, his grip on my wrist uncomfortably firm. I smiled and played my part, and he eventually released me, but I knew that time was running out. There were nights when I lay awake, listening to the creak of the old house, wondering if this would be the night when everything came crashing down. There were moments when the fear threatened to overwhelm me, when I wanted nothing more than to flee, to disappear, to escape the weight of responsibility that had been placed on my shoulders. But I did not flee. I could not. Not when Lord Sebastian was by my side, his gray eyes steady and sure. Not when my brothers stood behind me, their love and support unwavering. Not when justice demanded that I see this through to the end. The confrontation with Lord Reginald came on a night in late February, at a ball hosted by one of the most prominent families in London. I was wearing a gown of midnight blue, my hair swept up in an elaborate style, and I looked, for all the world, like the lady I had once been. Lord Sebastian was at my side, handsome in his evening clothes, and my brothers were scattered throughout the crowd, ready to act if anything went wrong. Lord Reginald spotted me the moment I entered the room. I saw his face go pale, saw the shock and fear in his eyes, and I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. He had thought I was dead. He had thought he was safe. And now, here I was, living proof of his crimes. He tried to flee, of course. Men like him always do. But my brothers had anticipated this, and before he could reach the door, He found himself surrounded by men who would not be intimidated by his name or his wealth. "Lord Reginald Blackwell," Lord Edmund said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. "You are accused of causing great harm to Lady Eliza Ashford. You will answer for your crimes." The ballroom erupted in chaos. Women gasped and whispered. Men shouted questions and demands. Lord Reginald's allies pushed forward, trying to reach him, trying to help him escape. But the Ashford brothers had planned for this. Every exit was guarded. Every ally was blocked. Lord Reginald stood in the center of the room, surrounded by enemies, with nowhere left to run. He looked at me, and I saw the recognition dawn in his eyes. The shock, the disbelief, the fear of a man who had thought he was safe, who had thought he had escaped consequence, and who was now facing the truth of his actions. "You," he whispered, "you are supposed to be gone. I watched you fall." I stepped forward, and my voice rang clear across the silent room. "You tried to destroy me, but I survived. And now, Lord Reginald, you will face justice for what you have done. Not just to me, but to all the women you have hurt, all the lives you have damaged, all the families you have torn apart." The trial was swift, by the standards of Victorian justice. It was held in the highest court in the land, with judges who could not be bribed and a jury that could not be intimidated. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimony irrefutable. Servants who had witnessed Lord Reginald's cruelty came forward, their voices trembling but determined. Scientists who had analyzed the evidence presented their findings, irrefutable and damning. And I, Eliza Ashford, stood in the witness box and told my story. I told them about the bridge, about the cold water of the Thames closing over my head, about the darkness that had swallowed me, and the light that had brought me back. I told them about the streets of Whitechapel, about the cruelty of a society that saw me as a stranger rather than a victim. And I told them about the truth I had discovered, the truth about Lord Reginald and the women he had harmed. Lord Reginald's allies melted away as the truth came to light. One by one, they abandoned him, distancing themselves from the scandal, pretending they had never known him at all. He sat alone in the dock, a broken man, stripped of his wealth and his titles and his power. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to spend the rest of his days in prison, far from society and its comforts. The verdict was met with applause from the gallery, with cheers from the crowd that had gathered outside the courthouse. Justice had been served at last, but it brought me no joy, only a measure of peace. It was over. The man who had wronged me, who had thrown me into the river and left me to perish, would never hurt anyone again. In the aftermath, I stood at the edge of the Thames, looking down at the dark water where I had once drowned. Lord Sebastian was beside me, his hand warm in mine, and I felt the cold wind against my face like a blessing. The river flowed on, as it always did, carrying away the debris of the city, carrying away the memories of what had happened here. Somewhere beneath these waters, I had died. Somewhere in these depths, my old life had ended, and my new life had begun. I thought about the woman who had stood on this bridge so many months ago, fleeing from a marriage she could not endure, facing a choice that had seemed impossible. She had been afraid, that woman, desperate, alone. She had seen no way out, no future, no hope. But she had been wrong. There was always hope. I knew now. Even in the darkest moments, even when everything seemed lost, there was always a chance for redemption, a chance for love, a chance for a life that was worth living. I squeezed Sebastian's hand, and he looked down at me, his gray eyes soft with understanding. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking about second chances," I said, "about the woman I was and the woman I have become, about how different my life would have been if I had never died. If I had never woken in that mortuary, if I had never found you." He smiled, and the expression transformed his sharp features into something almost beautiful. "I think about that too," he admitted, about the man I was when you found me. Bitter, angry, consumed by the need for revenge. He paused, and his voice dropped to a whisper. You saved me, Eliza. You gave me a reason to live again. We saved each other, I said, and that is what we will continue to do. He kissed me then, there on the bridge where I had died and been reborn, and I felt the last of the shadows lift from my soul. The past was behind us. The future was unknown. But the present, this moment, this love, this was all that mattered. What now? I asked softly. Now, he said, we live. We build a future together. We create something beautiful out of all this pain. I smiled, and it was a real smile, perhaps the first real smile since I had woken in that cold, dark room so many months ago. I would like that, I said. He kissed me then, there on the bridge where I had died and been reborn, and I felt the last of the shadows lift from my soul. I am Eliza Ashford. I died and I came back. I was broken, and I was healed. I was forgotten, and I was remembered, and I am no longer afraid. The wedding was held in the spring, when the flowers were blooming and the air was sweet with the promise of new beginnings. My brothers stood with us, their faces bright with joy, and Mrs. Blackwood wept openly as I walked down the aisle. The chapel was filled with friends and allies, people who had stood by us through the darkest hours, and I felt their love like a warm embrace. The ceremony was held in a small church on the Ashford estate, the same church where generations of my family had been married, christened, and laid to rest. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting pools of color across the ancient stones. The air smelled of flowers and incense and the promise of forever. I wore a gown of ivory silk, simple and elegant, with a veil of lace that had belonged to my mother. My brothers had offered me jewels and finery, the treasures of the Ashford vault, but I had refused. I did not need diamonds to feel beautiful. I did not need pearls to know my worth. All I needed was the love of the man waiting for me at the altar, and the knowledge that I had earned this moment through struggle and sacrifice. Lord Sebastian, my Sebastian, waited for me at the altar, his gray eyes shining with a happiness I had never thought to see. He was dressed simply in a coat of dark blue, with a single white rose in his buttonhole. He watched me walk toward him, with an expression that made my heart skip, that made my breath catch, that made me believe in miracles after all. He took my hand as I reached him, and his voice was steady and sure as he spoke the vows that would bind us together for the rest of our lives. I, Sebastian Vane, take thee, Eliza Ashford, to be my wedded wife, he said, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better for worse, for richer for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. I looked into his eyes, and I saw everything I had ever wanted: love, safety, understanding. A future that was not defined by the past, but shaped by the choices we made together. I, Eliza Ashford, take thee, Sebastian Vane, to be my wedded husband, I replied, my voice trembling with emotion. To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better for worse, for richer for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. The vicar pronounced us man and wife, and Sebastian kissed me, soft and sweet, and full of promise. The congregation applauded, and my brothers cheered, and Mrs. Blackwood sobbed with joy. And I, Eliza Ashford Vane, felt complete for the first time in my life. The celebration that followed was everything a wedding should be. There was music and dancing, feasting and laughter, toasts that grew increasingly ribald as the evening wore on. My brothers took turns dancing with me, each one whispering words of love and blessing in my ear. Lord Edmund told me he was proud of me. Lord Arthur promised to build me any machine I desired. Lord Frederick offered to name a new element after me. Lord George spoke of the children Sebastian and I might have, and the brilliant minds they would inherit. Lord Henry blessed my health and promised to always be there if I needed him. And Lord William, the philosopher, told me that I had proven something profound about the nature of the soul. "You died," he said, his blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "And yet you remained yourself. Your memories were lost, but your essence, the core of who you are, survived. That tells me that the soul is more resilient than we ever imagined. That love and courage and determination are not merely functions of the brain, but something deeper, something eternal." I thought about his words as Sebastian and I danced together, his arm warm around my waist, his gray eyes locked on mine. I thought about the woman I had been, and the woman I had become, and the woman I hoped to be. I thought about death and rebirth, about loss and discovery, about the strange and winding path that had brought me to this moment. And I knew that whatever the future held, I would face it without fear. I do not know what the future holds. There are still shadows in the world, still dangers lurking in the places where light does not reach. The Lazarus machine still exists, a wonder and a warning, and there are those who would use it for purposes darker than we can imagine. My brothers and I will spend our lives guarding it, protecting it, ensuring that it is never abused. But for now, in this moment, I am at peace. I have found my family. I have found my love. I have found the truth of who I am and what I am capable of. The woman who woke in a mortuary, alone and afraid, is gone. In her place stands someone new, someone stronger, someone who has looked death in the face and chosen to live. I am Lady Eliza Vane, wife of Lord Sebastian, sister of the Aether barons, survivor of the impossible. And my story is just beginning. The society that once mocked me now looks upon me with wonder. The women who threw stones and spat curses now seek my favor, their eyes hungry with curiosity and envy. I do not hate them, though I remember every cruelty they inflicted. I simply pity them, these creatures of gossip and malice who cannot imagine a world beyond their small, petty concerns. They do not know what I know. They have not seen what I have seen. They have not walked through the valley of the shadow of death and emerged, scarred but unbroken, on the other side. But I have, and I am grateful. Every morning, I wake beside Sebastian, feeling the warmth of his body against mine, and I marvel at the miracle of my existence. I was dead, and now I am alive. I was alone, and now I am loved. I was nothing, and now I am everything. My brothers visit often, each one bringing gifts and stories and the latest news from their laboratories. Lord Edmund speaks of new discoveries, of advances that will change the world. Lord Arthur shows me designs for machines that seem to defy the laws of physics. Lord Frederick describes chemical compounds that glow with an inner light. Lord George tells me of biological wonders that challenge everything we think we know about life. Lord Henry brings healing and hope, his medical skills saving lives that would otherwise be lost. And Lord William, the philosopher, speaks of the soul, of consciousness, of the mysteries that lie at the heart of human existence. They are brilliant, all of them, and they are mine. I often think about the woman I was before I died, the Eliza who ran from an arranged marriage, who chose death over a life of misery. I do not blame her for her choice. I understand the desperation that drove her to that bridge, the fear and the anger and the terrible sense of having no other option. But I am not that woman anymore. I have learned that there are always other options, even when the darkness seems absolute. I have learned that love can exist in the most unexpected places, that kindness can flourish in the midst of cruelty, that hope can survive even the most devastating losses. I have learned that we are stronger than we know. Sebastian and I have spoken of the future, of the children we might have, of the legacy we will leave behind. The Lazarus machine still haunts us, a reminder of what is possible and what must never be allowed to happen again. We have agreed to seal it away, to protect its secrets from those who would abuse its power. But we have also agreed to continue our research, to explore the boundaries of ether science, to push the limits of human knowledge while respecting the limits of human ethics. It is a delicate balance, but we are learning. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I stand by the window and look out at the city spread below me. London, with its fog and its gaslight, its grand mansions and its squalid slums. It is a city of contrasts, of beauty and ugliness, of hope and despair. It is the city that nearly destroyed me, and the city that ultimately saved me. I remember the cold of those nights in the doorways, the hunger that gnawed at my stomach, the fear that was my constant companion. I remember the kindness of strangers, the few who reached out when everyone else turned away. I remember the moment when Sebastian found me, the spark of curiosity in his gray eyes that would become the flame of love. And I remember the Ashfords, my brothers, who made terrible mistakes but never stopped loving me, who risked everything to bring me back and then moved heaven and earth to find me again. We are not perfect, any of us. We are flawed and broken and scarred by the lives we have lived. But we are also capable of extraordinary things, of love that transcends death, of science that defies the impossible, of redemption that rises from the ashes of our failures. That is the lesson I have learned. That is the truth I carry with me. I am Eliza Ashford Vane. I died and I came back. I was lost and I was found. I was mocked and bullied by a society that did not know my worth, a society that looked at my rags and my hunger and saw only a monster to be feared. But they were wrong. I was never a monster. I was always a woman with a family who loved her, with a destiny that would not be denied, with a strength that even death could not extinguish. And now, at last, I am home. The last page of my story is not yet written. There are still adventures to be had, still mysteries to be solved, still challenges to be faced. Sebastian and I will face them together, with my brothers at our backs and the power of ether science at our command. But for now, in this moment, I am content. The fire crackles in the hearth, the snow falls softly outside the window. Sebastian sits across from me, his gray eyes warm with love, a book open in his lap. My brothers are gathered in the next room, their voices rising and falling in animated discussion. Mrs. Blackwood bustles about, overseeing the servants, ensuring that everything is as it should be. This is my life now. This is my world, and I would not trade it for anything. I close my eyes and let the peace wash over me. I think of the woman I was, the woman I became, and the woman I am now. I think of the journey that brought me here, the pain and the fear and the impossible hope. And I smile, because I know the truth. I know what it means to die and to live again. I know what it means to be alone in the darkness and to find the light. And I know that this is not the end, it is only the beginning.